Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about some of the impact of the climate change, or if you talk about climate change, we talk about various different things, including drought. So we'll try to relate that to the pest management, effect of those on pest, and then ultimately to the pest management. Okay, so when we talk about climate change, we think about three things, right? The carbon dioxide level go up. Temperature is, as you know, go up, and precipitation is more erratic. So we see, 5 years, 6 years of drought, and then we have these wet years, and all that issue associated with that, either flooding or the drought. So these are the three parameters, and how these parameters might impact the pest in pest management in the future. Really, there has not been a lot of work done looking at the increased level of carbon dioxide on insect pests, but there are some that shows it's mostly not directly related to the pest, but it's more related to the increased carbon dioxide that impact the plant, and that makes the plant vulnerable to the insect pest, right? So we can see some of the example. One of the examples, direct effect, is it can increase the carbon dioxide increased level can increase the insect fecundity, consumption rate, and then also the insect abundance and density. There has also been indirect relation to the making the host crop more susceptible. But I think that overall, the role of the carbon dioxide on pest and its impact, it's need to look at species level of the crop as well as the pest, because every insect is different, and host crop also reaction to these carbon dioxide is also different. Okay, let's move on to the main topic, which is the temperature, impact of temperature to insect. As you know, the insects are generally called the cold-blooded animals, poikilothermics. So what that means is that the insect growth, development, reproduction, everything goes inside the body of the insect is influenced by the outside temperature. That's the reason that we don't see the insect activity in the wintertime, because they will not tolerate that outside environment temperature. That's why they need to hide, go somewhere in a sort of like dormancy age, die, pause, and those kind of things. So external temperature, ambient temperature is really critical for insect survival, growth, and mortality also. So that's why we use something called the growing degree days, right? So for the insect, because in a certain temperature, lower temperature, if certain temperature happens, the insect activity would basically reduce or doesn't happen at all. And when in the springtime, when it's the temperature certain level, then we start seeing the insect development start happening. So that temperature we call lower development threshold. And if you looked at the y-axis, that's the insect development rate, and then it's a temperature. So as the temperature increases, the rate of the development, it's a rate of insect development which also go up, right? More or less linearly, up to a certain point where there is extreme temperature there. At that point, the insect rate may not increase the constant rate. It may not increase in increasing rate, but it can be constant after that point, so it can be plateau. That we call the horizontal cutoff in terms of calculating degree day, and majority of the insect, they follow these trends. So that's why we use, the majority of the cases we use horizontal cutoff. And there are some insects also follow the vertical cutoff. That means that once it's certain temperature hits, their development is completely, basically stopped clearly. Okay, so that's the reason we use the growing degree days instead of using the calendar days to predict the different stages of the insect, and different stages of the insect, and then their development. So here are some of the examples, some of the sort of research-based conclusions, actually, how the increased temperature affect the insect. It certainly, as I said, it's not dependent on the calendar days, it depends on the degree days. So that means that there is a greater chance when the temperature increases, they will complete their development in shorter period of time, so they complete the more generation. That's kind of like generally natural. They can expand the geographic expansion. Again, if some of the geographic region previously was not suitable for certain insect, that region can be suitable, right? Other cases that they are also mentioned that outbreak of the various disease that transmitted by the insect, again with the same reason, that you expect the more population increase in these vectors that will impact overall outbreak of the diseases. And we see in the recent years, we see some of these insect vector disease also increasing. Maybe it could be that curly top virus that we're seeing in tomato has been increased in the last couple of years. That could be because of the increased population of the insect, or could be because of the drier condition out there and the other host crop is not there anymore, so they move on to the crop. Either way, that impacting the agriculture of the tomato production. Increase overwintering survival because the winter temperature is getting kind of the minimum temperature going up, and so in that case the survival can be higher. Other cases that they found that whenever this temperature changes increase happens, they impact differently to the pest as well as its natural enemies. So if that happens, the synchrony between predator or natural enemies with the pest would also become imbalanced, and that could create a problem in a natural control system too. And also with the host plant too, it's the same way, because the pest and then the host plant, the temperature making changes on those two different things could be different, and that could also kind of tilt the balance into one direction. Okay, so talking about temperature overall, as you see here, the blue line is below average temperature in the years, and you can see the years that they listed here. So before 1990, you can see a lot of years that we have the below average temperature. And after that point, you can see a lot of years. And here, like only 7 out of the 30 years that we have below average temperature. So mostly we can see the warming, the temperature. And already the top one also saw the similar thing in there too. If you looked at the Central Valley in California, we're seeing the similar trend. And based on the various research, it shows that by the end of the century, we'll increase the temperature by anywhere from 2 to 7 degrees centigrade. So again, coming back to the insect, because temperature influence insect, how that impact the insect or pest that generally we deal with. So we started working with Toppen. This is a paper that we published. Toppen is the lead author. They are the climate scientists. I'm entomology, so we kind of work together. So on this navel orangeworm, so if you work on nut crops, you definitely know about navel orangeworm, right? So I was looking at the stat of this insect and then how much we produce the almond pistachio together. We produce about 3.65 billion ton almond plus pistachio every year. And in general, on an average, navel orangeworm causes about 1% damage. If that translates into the dollar value, that would cost about $73 million every year with the 1% navel orangeworm damage on these two crops only, okay? So that's a pretty significant number if you think about that. So navel orangeworm, they lay eggs on the split nuts, and then larvae go inside and feed on the kernel, so that becomes the kernel becomes inedible. Also, it can create the environment where aflatoxin causing fungus colonize and then create the chances for aflatoxin contamination in the crop. So we looked at the temperature. If you looked at just kind of generally the navel orangeworm activity, this is the first flight. This is second and third flight. So in general, we have up to 4 flight in the valley. That's a current estimation in generally. But I'll talk about that a little later too. So we start looking at the impact of the temperature on navel orangeworm. Basically looking at is 23 Central Valley counties. Look at the temperature, 5 locations in each counties. The historical temperature as well as the future predicted temperature based on these different models, climatic models. And we looked at the 2 scenarios, where one scenario, the RCP 4.5 says that we will do something to mitigate climate change in the future. So it considered that factor. Versus 8.5 is more like a business as usual, where we won't do too much to address the climate change into the future. So what happens in these 2 situations? And we also produce the heat maps using the technology called kriging, the technique called kriging. So for this, we use just all the published literature articles that we use to calculate the degree day for navel orangeworm, minimum temperature, maximum temperature, their generation time, first generation, second generation, third generation. These are all published data, and then also these are the ones that we use to calculate navel orangeworm degree days in a regular basis. Okay, so how that impact shrinking that number of the days for particular generation, right? So there is a lot of things here, but I want to say, because of the time, I want to say is that found that at least the first generation of navel orangeworm, which survive on that, and they called the mummy nuts, the nuts from the last year, the future conditions by the end of the century, that the generations that calendar days can be reduced by about 6 weeks because of the future climatic condition. Again, there are a lot of examples, there are a lot of counties and things in here, but just a kind of gist of that. If you looked at the number of generations, so I mentioned that there are 3 to 4 generations happening in the valley right now. This is the 5th generation. The predicted, it's a historical look at, if you looked at this, we don't have the 5th generation, but if you start looking at 2040, 2070, in the end of the century, that's where you're seeing these southern part of the valley in the counties will have or likely have 5th generation of navel orangeworm. And again, it's not surprising given what is happening temperature-wise, what is happening, its impact to their life cycle, what is happening in terms of number of generations, right? So as early as 2040, that we'll see 3 counties out of the counties, 23 counties we calculated likely have the 5th generation of navel orangeworm. And this is using this kind of the measures 4.5, which is we do something as a society to address the climate change issue in the past, in the future. So if you consider that fact, you still will get this increased activity of navel orangeworm. This is in the 8.5 model. It's even more intense because, again, as I said, that we'll not address the climate change related issue in the future in that model. Pistachio, a little different because some of these, the navel orangeworm generations, how long it takes to grow in pistachio versus almond in the walnuts is a little different. So again, we're seeing the kind of more or less similar trend in the pistachio also. Not only us, but there has also been some work done looking at recently and looking at these temperature factor, and they also finding that, if you look at the map, this red or yellowish color, those are the ones that is going more than 5 generation a year, right? So you can see that south of Bakersfield, there is a chunk of place where right now, they're predicting that the fifth generation is already happening. So this is based on the 2022 one of the research data. So even more intense than what we found in our model-based thing. Also, there has also been work done in the walnut pest, focusing on a lot of walnut pests, looking at the growing degree days here. You can see a number of generation for cardling moth, which is a prominent pest in walnuts, spider mites, and European red mites. So all of they have impact of the temperature to their generations and generally go up their number of generations because of that. Just one example, this is for cardling moth. This is the 1950s. If you looked at the color, as I said, the blue or greenish color are less number of the generations, right? Number of generations here. If you looked at the yellow, that's a 4 to 5 generations. And so when you go down, and you can see more yellowing on the Central Valley, right? So that's kind of like shows the kind of pictorial view of the increased generation in the future. This is for the spider mites, kind of more or less a similar thing there too. We looked at the drought. I'm not talking too much about drought because I put some of the slide here just to have this information here. But the drought also impact, which is a byproduct of the climate change, all impact on insect in various ways. It can be creating the favorable environment to the crop. On other cases, drought stress plants are more attractive to the insect. Also, they are more physiologically suitable for the insect in a lot of different regions. So drought is also not friend in that regard. There are some of the insects are directly, indirectly affected by this drought also. Again, this is one of the slides that I put in here. I won't have time to go through, but spider mites is always highly influenced by the drought or drier condition of the environment that favors them. Ants, we're seeing more increased activity of ants because of that also. Walnut huskfly, that's one of the insects that is influenced by the chilling requirement or the cold temperature in the wintertime because they overwinter in the soil during the wintertime. And if you have these chilling hours not made, then their emergence in the summer would be more erratic, right? And so because of that, the control measures for the walnut huskfly would be also challenging. Those kind of things. We're seeing the more activity of the other stink bug and other insect. We're seeing this flat-headed borer, this a newer kind of new emergent pest because this insect also loves drought or the stress trees by whatever region. In some cases, they also influence the pesticide efficacy by different various means. So I think the long-term strategy is the last slide. The second last slide, we need to kind of, this general idea for this is kind of think about how long-term we can manage these insect pests. Not only by just managing, but also how we can prioritize research, how we can think about these insects and the activity going on in the area, and those kind of things. And there has been also some of these out-of-the-box kind of work going on right now. For example, using some of the nanoparticles in the drought stress to reduce the drought stress in some of the environment and those kind of things. Again, I think ultimately we want to kind of prepare the society, industry, state, whatever, right? So in terms of providing more funding, because if this kind of situation is happening, it will not only impact the immediate crop, but also it impacts the whole industry and society. So that's kind of the message that we wanted to bring with this study on the impact of climate change. So with that, I'm running out of time, but if I have time, then I'll take one or two questions.
Well, just a quick question while we're transitioning.
Sure. Okay.
Last summer, we had so many days over 95, so many days over 100, which seemed like more than usual. What did you see happen from that?
Well, it's hard to exactly know from the 1 year observation, but when you see these drier conditions, there's influence in different ways. Not only the insect growth, but they also create the stress to the plant, and then that also has a counter effect. We certainly see these stink bug numbers and pressure going up in the last several years, and we think that it's also one of the factors could be the drought, and also the winter temperature, right? So when the winter temperature go up, their overwintering is not, their overwintering survival is going up, and so that also can influence. So yeah, I don't have the exact answer, but I think a 1 year observation may not be enough.
So we're on the orange navelworm on the emergence for this year. We've had a pretty cold year so far in terms of chill hours. When do you expect? I noticed one of your slides you had an emergence, the median emergence at March 19th, right? Where do you think the orange navelworm emergence median is going to be this year? Do you think it's going to be April 30?
Well, for the navelworms, I don't think that they need chill hours or anything, because the main thing for navelworms right now is that they're overwintering as a larva inside the nut. So they're pretty much kind of sealed. They're not flying right now because of the outside environment, the rain and the cold temperature is still prevailing, so they're not flying, they're not coming out. But whenever temperature hits, they just, instead of coming 2, 5, 7, they come out 12 in one day, right? So I don't think that they will shift that much. But I think the another factor could be that the winter temperature or the rainfall overall, they might increase the mortality of the navelworm in the winter time. So hopefully we'll see a little less number of the navelworm coming out. But I don't think that the temperature will directly.
No, I'm saying, I mean, the bugs live off, I mean, their cycles are based on temperature, right? And so when's that initial emergence? Because as a farmer, you know, it's easier to kill the bug as a worm than it is a moth, right? And so, I mean, if we know when that first cycle, and it's easier to kill the first cycle than the fifth cycle. If you get to 5 cycles on orange navelworm, that's game, set, trophy. I mean, just in terms of the population growth, you know, between every generation adds about another X number of orange navelworm to the field, you know.
Well, in general, what we have seen in the last several years is that around mid-April, third week of April, that's where we're seeing we call the egg biofix, when the moths are flying and then start laying eggs. That's the kind of the standard. So, I mean, we still need to wait and see what that biofix would be for this year. But in general, as I said, mid-April to third week of April, that's where we're seeing.
That's when you're seeing flights.
The
first
yes.
flight is maybe
Yes.
third week of April.
Yeah. Well, the flight can happen about a week ago, and then we're seeing the egg laying happen there. So yeah, you can say that the moth will emerge, and immediately after they will lay eggs, you know, mating and after lay eggs like 2-3 days after the emergence. So yeah, it's about.
So I better get my traps out.
We need to put the traps out right now, or you know, you still can catch some moth, but you may not catch the significant number that you can set the biofix.
So the biofix, what we found in the paper, you know, typically you just have a calendar day, but with this temperature, minimum temperature, especially the ones which kind of puts the biofix even further in the February or March, early March, yeah. So, all right, well, we are out of time.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you for the question.